He thought it was just an old suitcase under a wooden bench. But his retired K9 wouldn't stop barking. What they found inside? A little boy alone, tied up and left for dead. That moment changed everything. Why would someone abandon a child like luggage? Who left him there, and why? This isn't just a rescue story. It's a story about instinct, about redemption, and maybe, just maybe, a quiet miracle sent by God. Share this video if you believe no child should be forgotten. Comment your thoughts, or just type Amen if you believe in second chances. Like, comment, and subscribe for more real stories of hope. May God bless every heart watching this today. Bend, Oregon, awoke under a veil of thick fog on that Monday morning, the kind that rolled down from the Cascade Mountains and wrapped the town in a damp, breathless hush. The streets were slick with dew, and the sky, a pale stretch of pewter, gave no promise of light. At the edge of town, Bend's Central Bus Depot stood half asleep, its yellow platform lights flickering through the mist. Commuters shuffled beneath the awnings, clutching coffee cups and crumpled tote bags, some already annoyed by the delay caused by the low visibility. It was the kind of morning where no one looked each other in the eye. No one wanted to talk. No one noticed the old suitcase under the bench. Chief Thomas Whitmore noticed the dog first. At 38, Thomas was not the kind of man who filled up a room with noise. He was tall, over 6'2", but carried himself with the measured quiet of someone who had once lived in places where silence meant survival. His dark brown hair was cut short, streaked slightly with gray at the temples, and his eyes, a steady shade of steel blue, had the patience of a man who'd seen too much and yet still chose to serve. A former Marine turned small-town police chief, Thomas returned to his hometown of Bend after a tour in Afghanistan left him with more questions than answers. He never married, never had kids. People around town said he was decent, reliable, but distant, like a man always half listening to something only he could hear. At his side trotted Ranger, a German shepherd whose salt and pepper coat betrayed his age, 8 years old, though his posture still spoke of discipline and readiness. Ranger had served as an IED detection dog overseas before being retired. Most dogs like him end up in quiet homes or shelters. But 2 years ago, Thomas enrolled him into a local pilot program that reintegrated retired service K9’s into civilian law enforcement for low-risk patrol. They weren't hunting criminals today, just walking the perimeter of the bus station, checking for anything suspicious, responding to occasional loiterers. Easy work for a Monday, but suddenly Ranger stopped. He froze mid-stride, ears pointing forward, tail going stiff. A low growl, deep and gravelly, began in his chest. Thomas turned his head and immediately knew it wasn't a false alarm. Ranger's body language had shifted. This wasn't how he reacted to drugs or explosive residue. This was something else, something older. Instinct. "Easy, boy," Thomas said under his breath, tightening the leash. "What is it?" Ranger began pulling toward the far end of the platform, nose to the ground. Commuters parted around them like water around a stone, some staring, others too groggy to care. At the edge of the bench row, tucked almost out of sight, lay a battered maroon suitcase. One wheel was broken, and the corner was scuffed open like it had been dragged. It didn't look out of place, but Ranger was now circling it, growling louder. Then he did something Thomas hadn't seen since their last deployment. He dropped to a sit, shoulders locked, body tense, eyes locked onto the suitcase. A signal. Thomas's heart thudded. He tapped his radio. "Dispatch, this is Chief Whitmore at Bend Central Depot. Possible suspicious package. Request bomb squad and platform evacuation." The response crackled through. "Copy that, Chief. Units en route. ETA 7 minutes." As Thomas began clearing the platform, a transit officer named Maya Collins, a sharp young woman in her mid-20s with a ponytail tucked under her cap and a badge she wore like armor, jogged over. She was new to the force, eager, and still had the kind of optimism that hadn't been filed down by bureaucracy. "Bomb threat?" she asked, already moving to help evacuate. "Could be," Thomas said, eyes never leaving the case. "Could be worse." Ranger whined suddenly. Then came the sound. So faint Thomas thought he imagined it. A muffled whimper. He stilled. Ranger tilted his head, ears twitching. The sound came again, softer, urgent, almost human. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. "Maya," he said quietly, "get these people back. All the way to the outer lot." Maya didn't argue. Thomas stepped slowly toward the suitcase, hand on his sidearm. Protocol said wait for the bomb squad. But instinct said otherwise. His gut twisted. The suitcase shifted, barely, but enough to make him draw his weapon. "Stay back," he ordered to the few people lingering behind the security line. Ranger barked once, short, sharp. A signal from the old days. Life detected. Thomas holstered his weapon and dropped to one knee. He pressed 2 fingers against the zipper. It was old and rusted. The metal rasped loudly as it peeled open. The first thing that hit him was the smell, stale cloth, sweat, fear. Then he saw it. A small sneaker. Pink and yellow. Then wide brown eyes, ringed in dirt and terror. A boy. No older than 4. His mouth was bound with duct tape, hands tied to his knees, body folded like a letter. He didn't cry. Didn't scream. He just stared. "Oh God," Thomas whispered. He reached in, gently tore the tape from the boy's mouth. The child winced but said nothing. His lips were chapped, his skin pale. Thomas lifted him into his arms. The boy didn't resist. He simply trembled, as if waiting for punishment or something worse. Ranger leaned forward and licked the boy's hand. The child flinched, then relaxed just slightly. Thomas hit his radio again. "This is Whitmore. We have a live child. Repeat, live child. Bound and found inside the suitcase. Request EMS, pediatric trauma response. Immediate." He looked into the boy's eyes. Hollow. Blank. The look of someone who had not just been hidden, but discarded. "You're safe now," Thomas murmured. "We've got you." Sirens approached in the distance. As the boy curled tighter in Thomas's arms and Ranger stood watch at his side, the morning fog began to lift, but only a little. The emergency room at Deschutes Medical Center in downtown Bend was unusually quiet for a Monday morning. It might have been the lingering fog outside, or the fact that no one expected a call like the one they'd just received. A child discovered bound inside a suitcase at a bus station. Nurses moved quickly but silently, the weight of the situation replacing the usual hum of routine. Chief Thomas Whitmore stood just inside the trauma bay entrance, his uniform damp from the morning mist, his hands still slightly trembling though his face betrayed nothing. In his arms, the small boy remained curled tightly, skin pale, eyes wide but unfocused. A nurse gently took the child from him, and Thomas stepped back, his gaze following every movement. The attending trauma nurse, Janet Lowe, a woman in her late 40s with short silver-streaked curls and the kind of calm that only comes from 20 years in pediatric ER, took charge. She was stout, with gentle hands and a firm tone, known for handling the worst cases with a kind of maternal resilience. Her eyes met Thomas's. "You said he was found in a suitcase?" "Bound. Gagged. No ID," Thomas replied, voice low. "Still hasn't spoken. Vitals are weak. Dehydrated and cold, but no visible wounds so far." "We'll do a full trauma scan," Janet said, nodding toward a younger nurse to prepare for fluids. "You stay close." "He clung to you like a lifeline." "He trusted the dog more than me," Thomas muttered. Outside the bay, Ranger sat silently by the door, ears slightly back, but eyes alert, tracking every movement inside. His dark coat, still damp, clung to his lean body. The hospital didn't typically allow animals in clinical areas, but no one had questioned Ranger's presence. One orderly tried to object earlier, and Thomas, normally measured and composed, had looked at him with a stare so cold that the young man simply nodded and walked away. The boy had not cried. Not during the ambulance ride. Not during the examination. He simply trembled, locked in a quiet that felt too deliberate for a 4-year-old. As Janet and the team worked, Thomas stepped into the adjacent observation hallway and pulled out his phone. He dialed. "Evans," came the voice on the other end. Detective Josh Evans, Ben's lead investigator, early 40s, with a reputation for being methodical, skeptical, and maddeningly thorough. Josh had thinning blonde hair, square-framed glasses, and always wore an old brown leather jacket that reeked faintly of cigar smoke. He didn't care for rules unless they protected something worth saving. "We've got a situation," Thomas said without preamble. "You're going to want to come down to Deschutes ER. Is this about that suitcase call?" "There was a child inside, Josh." Silence. "Then, I'm on my way." Less than 20 minutes later, Josh arrived, carrying 2 steaming cups of black coffee, one of which he offered to Thomas as they stood by the window looking into the trauma room. "He doesn't look injured," Josh said after a long moment. "Not on the outside. Who the hell puts a kid in a suitcase?" Thomas didn't answer. Ranger shifted on the tile beside them and let out a quiet sigh, resting his head on his paws. Josh took a sip of coffee. "Any ID on the kid?" "Nothing. No tags on the suitcase, no note, no personal items. Just duct tape, cloth straps, and panic." "You checked the station cameras?" "Only partially. I flagged transit. They're pulling everything from 5 a.m. onward." "Any leads?" "Not yet. But I saw something. Right before the suitcase was left, a woman in a gray hoodie appears near the platform. You can't see her face, but her wrist flashes in the light, a bracelet." Josh raised an eyebrow. "Pink and white. Twine. Like one of those handmade friendship bracelets." "A woman?" "That's what it looked like." Janet stepped out of the trauma bay and nodded toward them. "He's stable for now. No signs of assault. He's going to need fluids and observation. And," she hesitated, "psych evaluation." "Still no words?" Thomas asked. "Not a sound. Doesn't respond to names. Doesn't flinch at medical tools. But," she glanced at Ranger, "he keeps his eyes on the dog. When Ranger's near, his breathing calms. He even reached out a hand once." Thomas looked down at Ranger, then back at Janet. "Can he stay in the room?" She considered it. "Technically, no. But practically, yes." Back inside the room, the boy now wore a hospital gown too large for his frame. His small hands rested on the blanket as he sat upright, spine stiff, like a soldier awaiting orders. Thomas entered quietly, followed by Ranger, who padded toward the boy and lay down beside the bed. The boy's fingers twitched, then slowly extended. He touched Ranger's ear. Thomas watched, heart clenched. He sat beside the bed, not too close. "You don't have to talk," he said gently. "But I'm going to ask you something, and if you can shake your head or nod, that's enough." The boy didn't react. "Do you remember your name?" "Nothing." "Do you know where you're from?" Still nothing. But his fingers remained on Ranger's ear. "Okay," Thomas whispered. "We'll wait. No rush." Josh appeared in the doorway with a laptop under his arm. "I've got the first clip from transit," he said. Thomas stepped out again. They watched the grainy footage. A woman approached the bench at 5:42 a.m., carrying the suitcase. Hood up. Head down. No car visible. No one walks with her. She places the suitcase under the bench, looks left, then disappears. Josh froze the screen. "There," he pointed. "Zoom in." It wasn't perfect, but they could see it. A pink and white bracelet on her left wrist. Josh leaned back. "That's our suspect." "She didn't hesitate," Thomas said. "She moved like she knew exactly where the cameras were. Which means it wasn't her first time." Back in the hospital room, Ranger lay still beside the boy, who now leaned against the dog's side, eyes closed. Thomas watched from the hallway, one hand gripping his coffee cup, the other resting on his belt. The fog outside had lifted. But inside the room, everything still felt clouded, like they were all waiting for something unnamed to rise to the surface. The wind was starting to pick up outside, carrying with it the chill of the high desert night that settled heavy over Bend. The late evening quiet on Alderwood Lane, a quiet cul-de-sac flanked by tall pine and scattered ranch-style houses, was broken only by the rustle of wind through trees and the occasional flicker of a motion sensor light. It was nearing 10 p.m., and Chief Thomas Whitmore was finally home, physically at least. His mind, though, remained inside a pediatric hospital room 2 miles away where a nameless boy slept with one hand tangled in the fur of a German shepherd who refused to leave his side. Thomas's home was simple. 2 bedrooms, pine floors, a stone fireplace blackened from use, and walls hung with photographs of landscapes and faded service medals rather than people. He lived alone, by choice more than circumstance, and kept things neat out of instinct, if not comfort. Tonight, though, something felt off. He couldn't name it, not yet, but his body had learned to listen to what his mind hadn't caught up to. He stepped onto the porch, mug of cooling coffee in hand, and glanced out across his yard. The fog had returned, thinner now, curling like smoke at ankle height. The motion sensor on his porch light blinked on as he opened the screen door and leaned down to retrieve the mail, only to pause. Sitting squarely on the welcome mat was a box. No tape, no postage, no label. Just an old brown cardboard box, gently creased and slightly damp from dew. It hadn't been there an hour ago. Thomas didn't move at first. Years of patrol work in combat had taught him that the most ordinary things often carried the deepest threats. He placed the mug down and stepped inside for gloves and a flashlight. When he returned, he crouched, gently nudging the box with the toe of his boot. Nothing shifted. No ticking, no sound. Still, his heart rate ticked upward. Inside, Ranger, who had been lying by the fireplace, suddenly rose, ears perked forward, and let out a low growl that vibrated in his chest like thunder before the lightning. Thomas stiffened. That growl wasn't for show. It meant something. Someone had been here. Recently. With deliberate care, Thomas peeled open the flaps of the box. Inside lay 3 objects. The first was a crayon drawing, childlike and shaky, a stick-figure boy holding hands with a large dog beside what looked like a field and a small house. The second was a pink sock, worn and wrinkled, clearly belonging to a child. The third was a photograph, slightly bent, of the boy, the same boy from the suitcase, asleep on a blue couch, wrapped in a blanket and surrounded by plush animals. His face was peaceful in a way Thomas hadn't yet seen. But it was the writing on the back of the photograph that made Thomas sit down slowly on the porch steps. I kept him safe. Now it's your turn. The handwriting was uneven, like someone who hadn't written in a long time. He read it twice more, then turned to Ranger. The dog was now at the window, nose pressed to the glass, tail stiff. Someone was here, Thomas said under his breath. He grabbed a flashlight and moved toward the edge of the porch, scanning the front yard, then the sides of the house. The motion light blinked again. A breeze rustled the pine needles overhead, but there were no footsteps, no car engine in the distance. Just silence. Back inside, Thomas laid the items on his kitchen table. Ranger followed, eyes never leaving the window. It wasn't just paranoia. Someone had not only found his home, but knew the boy was with him. And not only that, they'd been watching long enough to know Ranger, to recognize the dog's connection to the boy. That meant proximity. And purpose. A soft knock at the door startled him. Hand on his holster, Thomas opened the door to reveal Officer Rachel Kim, a night shift patrol officer, mid-30s, Korean-American, petite but fierce, with dark eyes that rarely missed a detail and a voice that could stop a drunk driver mid-sentence. She was sharp, fair, and loyal to the bone. Thomas had trained her himself 5 years ago. "Chief," she said, stepping inside, glancing down at the box. "Dispatch said you wanted backup? I didn't call it in." Rachel frowned. "One of the neighbors flagged a unit. Said someone was prowling near your yard about half an hour ago. Figured I'd swing by." Thomas handed her the photo. She studied it. "That's him." He nodded. "Found inside a suitcase this morning. Still hasn't spoken." Rachel looked at the note. "Whoever left this, they weren't trying to hurt him." "No," Thomas said, eyes narrowing. "They were trying to pass him on." "You think the woman from the station is the same one who left this?" Thomas nodded. "Same instinct. She knew someone would come. She knew he'd be found. She made sure of it." Rachel turned back toward the window. "You want me to sweep the block?" "Not tonight. They're long gone by now." He picked up the sock and held it in his palm. It was small enough to disappear in one hand. Rachel hesitated before leaving. "That boy. He was meant to disappear, wasn't he?" "Yeah," Thomas said, looking at the drawing again. "But not by her. She left quietly, and the house returned to silence. Thomas sat down at his desk and pulled out a small leather notebook. He began sketching what he now had: a timeline, an image, and a sense of presence. He stared at the photo of the boy, Miles, as he had mentally started calling him, though he had no proof yet. There was something in the way the child curled around those stuffed animals that told him this photo wasn't taken by a monster. It was taken by someone who loved him. Nearby, Ranger finally lay down, but his ears remained alert. Thomas turned off the lights, then paused. He moved to the boy's room, the spare room now holding a small hospital-style cot. The child was gone for the night, still under medical care, but Thomas had laid out the blanket, the small water cup, a night light, preparing just in case. He looked down at the drawing one more time. There was a field, a small house, a sun with rays like fingers, and beside the boy a dog. It wasn't Ranger. It had a smaller tail, maybe a different dog, but the boy had drawn them side by side. "I'll find out who you are," he said softly to the paper. "And I'll find her too." Then he slipped the note into his desk drawer and turned off the last light. The morning sun crept slowly across the pines, casting long golden streaks onto the dashboard of Thomas's patrol vehicle as he waited outside Bend Central Library. Next to him in the passenger seat, Ranger sat alert, his ears slightly back, tail resting on the seat, eyes trained on the glass doors of the library's modest main entrance. Thomas sipped lukewarm coffee from a dented thermos, the tension in his body held tighter than his grip on the steering wheel. Inside, Detective Josh Evans was following up on a new lead, a paper trail connecting the crayon drawing from the mysterious box to a clinic visit months earlier. The woman they were looking for hadn't signed a name, but she had drawn a field, a house, and a dog, and that house matched one drawn again and again by the boy. When Josh emerged, he was flanked by a young woman in her late 20s, slim and pale, with thick-framed glasses, nervous hands, and a badge clipped to her flannel shirt that read Callie Jensen Reference and Records Assistant. "Her name might be Ellie," Josh said, sliding into the passenger seat. Callie recognized the handwriting style on the back of the photo. It matched a note someone left on a public help board 2 months ago. Same marker, same odd spelling. She was asking for scrap wood and blankets. She leave contact info? Just an address, temporary. Clinic in Tumalo. She called herself Willow. Tumalo was 20 minutes outside Bend, a small township straddling farmland and open forest. Ranger shifted in the seat as Thomas pulled out into traffic. The dog had been acting more alert since the box was found. His posture was different, less relaxed, more searching. The Tumalo Free Clinic was a single-story converted farmhouse with peeling white siding and a small porch crowded with broken chairs and overgrown potted plants. Inside, the walls were lined with flyers, housing resources, emergency food contacts, and hand-drawn signs in Spanish and English. The woman at the front desk looked up as they entered. She was middle-aged, African-American, with warm brown eyes and a calm, measured voice. Her name tag read Valerie Boone, and her energy exuded patience. She had a kind of maternal solidity, the kind that suggested she'd been dealing with chaos for a long time and had learned not to flinch. "Looking for someone?" she asked, glancing between the two men and the imposing German shepherd at Thomas's side. "She went by Willow," Josh said. "Might have brought a child in with bruises. No insurance. Paid cash." Valerie didn't blink. "We see a lot of folks like that. But yeah, I remember her. Came in a couple times over the past year. Always alone, except for the boy." "What was he like?" Thomas asked. "Quiet," Valerie replied, folding her arms. "Didn't speak much. Didn't play. But he followed her like a shadow. Clung to her shirt when the doctor listened to his chest. She called him Miles, but I don't know if that was his real name. She never answered questions. Just said she was passing through. Did she ever mention where she was staying? She asked about wood stoves and roof repairs. Said she didn't trust shelters. Said she was building something." Josh scribbled notes while Thomas exchanged a glance with Ranger, whose ears had perked sharply at the mention of Miles. Valerie pulled a sticky note from the drawer and slid it across the counter. "She left this once. Said if she didn't come back, we should call it. I don't know if it still works. A 10-digit number, half smudged from time and fingers. Thomas took a photo and thanked her. As they left the clinic, he let Ranger out to stretch. The dog moved purposefully toward the tree line behind the clinic's gravel lot, nose low, tail rigid. He's got something, Thomas muttered. They followed Ranger to the edge of the brush, where faint boot prints led toward the woods. With each bend in the trail, the trees grew denser, the air colder, the smell of smoke faint but present. Half a mile in, they found it. The cabin stood crooked among the trees, its tin roof patched with rusted sheets of metal, windows covered with towels and cardboard. One wall was blackened, the outer beams charred. Smoke stains marked the ceiling edges. A makeshift garden out front was long dead, pots overturned by wind or time. Inside, Ranger stepped carefully, nose twitching. The floor was covered with a thin, soot-dusted rug. Along the walls, Thomas saw chalk drawings, a child's sun with exaggerated rays, a small house, a blue dog with a smiling face. In one corner lay a burned mattress, next to a pile of singed children's books. One had its cover still legible, Scout and the Brave Day. Josh exhaled slowly. This was their home. Thomas knelt beside the wall. One section had been turned into a calendar, hand-drawn on taped-together notebook paper. Stars marked some days. Others were crossed out. The final square was blank. She was tracking routine, he murmured, trying to give him some normal. Why burn it down? Josh asked. Maybe she didn't. Maybe someone else was looking for her. Ranger suddenly growled low at a broken chair pushed against the far wall. Beneath it, Thomas pulled out a dirty plastic bin filled with small toys, a cracked ceramic mug, and a folded piece of fabric. He lifted it gently. A child's hoodie, size 4T. Josh turned slowly toward the door. We need to find her, Thomas. Soon. The sun had dropped low in the sky by the time Thomas and Josh reached the base of an unmarked fire road near the Three Sisters Wilderness. The air smelled of pine sap and lingering wood smoke, and the temperature had started to fall sharply. Ranger, ever alert, led the way with focused determination, nose close to the gravel, occasionally glancing back as if urging them forward. A tip from a forestry worker had led them here. A quiet man named Cole Anders, mid-50s, sun-leathered skin, wiry frame, and the kind of sharp, unhurried demeanor that comes from years spent walking trails most people never see. Cole had spotted a figure entering the tree-line with what looked like a heavy backpack, and later noticed smoke from a campfire in an area marked as restricted. He hadn't thought much of it until hearing a local news segment about a missing child found in a suitcase. She wasn't hiding like a criminal, he told Thomas over the hood of his dusty pickup earlier that afternoon. She was hiding like someone who's been hunted before. Now, with dusk settling around them, the trees thickened, absorbing sound. Ranger paused at a split in the path. He sniffed left, then right, ears twitching. With a low huff, he turned east, veering off the visible trail into brush. She's close, Thomas muttered. 10 minutes later, nestled between a rock outcrop and a cluster of firs, they saw it. A canvas tarp stretched over a makeshift shelter, smoke curling faintly from a rusted stovepipe angled through a flap. A thin rope with empty tin cans encircled the perimeter like an early warning system. Josh raised a hand to slow Thomas, his voice a low murmur. Let me go first? Thomas shook his head. She knows I'm coming. I think she's been waiting. They stepped forward carefully. Ranger stayed close, his muscles coiled, but his tail neutral, not aggressive. From behind the tarp, a calm voice called out, "You can put your guns down. I'm not going to run." Thomas froze mid-step. It was a woman's voice, tired, soft, but steady. The flap moved, and she stepped into view. Ellie Harper looked nothing like the threat some would imagine. She was in her early 30s, average height but thin, with long dark blonde hair tied back in a loose braid, strands escaping to cling to her cheekbones. Her clothes were layered, mismatched flannels, a gray utility jacket, hiking pants patched at the knees. Her boots were worn through at the soles. Her face was pale, framed by freckles and dark under eyes, and her hands shook slightly though she made no attempt to hide them. But what struck Thomas most was her expression. It wasn't fear or guilt. It was resolve. "You found him," she said, her voice hitching on the second word. Is he okay?" Thomas nodded slowly. "He's safe. At Deschutes Medical. He hasn't spoken yet." Ellie's face crumpled for a moment. She looked away, biting her lip hard, hands gripping the edge of her jacket to keep from shaking. "I figured someone would come eventually," she whispered. "I was just hoping it'd be someone who looked like you." Josh moved to the side, watching her from an angle, hand resting near his sidearm, but not reaching for it. Thomas took a slow step forward. "What's your name?" "Ellie Harper." "Legally, Eleanor. But I haven't used that in a long time." "Are you his mother?" She let out a long, tired breath. "No. I'm his aunt. Same mother, different fathers. My sister died 3 years ago. Miles was all she had left." "And his father?" "Martin Harper," Ellie said flatly. "On paper, a model parent. In reality, a man with a sealed record and a mean streak, so quiet no one believed me. He had custody. I had nothing." Thomas and Josh exchanged a glance. "You tried to fight for him?" Josh asked. Ellie nodded, then stepped back inside her shelter briefly. When she returned, she held a manila folder, worn, stained, edges curled. She handed it to Thomas. Inside were copies of family court transcripts, letters, a denied petition for emergency custody, and one sealed record dated 2016. I begged them to look deeper. They told me I didn't have standing. I didn't even have a job at the time. Just a one-bedroom trailer and a dozen bad reasons to say I wasn't good enough. Thomas flipped through the pages silently. "When my sister died," Ellie continued, voice trembling, "they handed Miles back to Martin. No one checked. No follow-up. I tried to visit. The last time I saw him, he had a bruise on his shoulder the size of my hand." Her eyes welled up. "So I waited. I watched. And the moment I had, I took him." She sank to her knees on the frozen ground. "I know it was illegal. I know what it looks like. But I swear to you, I didn't take him to hurt him. I took him because I knew no one else would listen." Ranger walked toward her, slowly, and sat a few feet away. He didn't growl, just watched. Ellie looked at the dog and let out a small laugh. "He trusted your dog. That's how I knew I was right. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't go to the police. Martin would have made me out to be crazy. So I waited. And when I realized someone was onto us, I panicked." She looked directly at Thomas, eyes pleading. "I knew he'd be found at the station. I knew a dog like him, trained, disciplined, wouldn't ignore it. I chose the suitcase because it was the only thing I could carry him in without drawing attention. I hated it, but it was the only way." Josh spoke up, his voice unusually gentle. "You said someone was on to you? I think Martin hired someone. Or he found me himself. I don't know. But I saw a man near the cabin. He had a telephoto lens. I didn't wait to find out more." Thomas nodded slowly. "Ellie Harper, you're going to need to come with us. You're not under arrest." "Not yet. But we need to sort this out the right way." Ellie didn't argue. She stood, arms wrapped around herself, and nodded. "Just let me know if he asks for me." Ranger stepped up beside her and sniffed gently at her hand. She let it rest on his head for a moment. "I always told him dogs don't lie," she said. "They don't know how." Thomas looked at her a long moment, then led her gently toward the car. The trees stood silent behind them. The shelter collapsed inward with the wind. The hallway outside the juvenile court archives was quiet, the buzz of old fluorescent lights mixing with the low hum of a copier down the hall. Detective Josh Evans leaned against a vending machine that hadn't been stocked properly since 2019 and stared at a door marked confidential records, authorized personnel only. He had spent the better part of the morning chasing down sealed files and hitting walls thicker than legal red tape. But now, thanks to a last-minute call from someone buried deep inside the system, that door was about to open. The knob turned, and a small woman stepped out. She looked to be in her early 40s, with a soft, tired face framed by messy brown curls pulled back into a bun. Her name was Janelle Ortiz, a records administrator with a reputation for being meticulous and discreet. She wore reading glasses perched on the end of her nose and a cardigan that looked 2 sizes too big. Her posture was slouched like someone who had spent too many years sitting in the dark between law books and forgotten lives. "I can only give you 10 minutes, she said, holding out a file folder already half open. "You didn't get it from me." Josh took the folder and nodded once. "Understood." Inside were documents marked with outdated stamps, smudged ink, and one bold red word across the top of the first page, sealed. He scanned quickly. A name jumped out, Martin Harper, Miles's biological father. There were 2 reports, both dated over 5 years ago, detailing allegations of child endangerment involving Martin's previous partner and her son. The charges had been dismissed due to lack of corroboration, but the language in the reports was chilling. Minor observed with bruises, fearful behavior, inconsistent explanations from guardian. How did this not flag during the custody hearing? Josh muttered. Janelle looked down. It should have, but the system's fragmented. Family court never got the cross-reference from child services, and sealed records stay sealed unless someone forces them open. He turned the last page and found a memo paper clipped to the back. Typed and unsigned. Internal concern regarding placement of Miles Harper with biological father. Known risk indicators present. Recommended follow-up. Denied. Josh clenched his jaw. "Who wrote this?" he asked, holding up the memo. Janelle hesitated. It was submitted through an internal whistleblower portal. The social worker didn't give their name, but I can tell you this much. They tried to intervene. The case was closed 3 weeks later. Back at the Bend Police Department, Thomas sat on a bench outside the Child Services Liaison office, legs spread, hands clasped between his knees, his badge clipped to the pocket of a flannel overshirt rather than his usual uniform. Beside him, Miles sat in a navy blue hoodie 2 sizes too big, legs dangling above the floor. The boy's sneakers were untied, his hair combed but still unruly, eyes fixed on the pencil sketch pad in his lap. He didn't speak much, but he had started to draw more. Thomas had become T, a letter the boy could whisper when he needed something but wasn't ready for words. Ranger had become R, and though the dog was officially not allowed inside the offices, he lay obediently just beyond the door, head propped up between his paws, ears trained on the child. Across the page, Miles had drawn a house. A simple one, square, with a triangle roof, a rectangle chimney, and smoke spiraling upward like the wind. Behind the house was a tree, and beside the tree, a dog with a big tail. The word Scout was written just under the paw. "Who's Scout?" Thomas had asked earlier. Miles had simply pointed to the picture and said, "Her dog." Thomas knew who her was, and though the system didn't yet have a decision, he knew Miles still trusted Ellie more than he could explain. A caseworker stepped out, a tall, composed man in his 50s with a clipboard and a phone clipped to his belt. Victor Luce, known in the region for being fair, emotionally intelligent, and utterly no-nonsense. He had a long face, gray eyebrows, and an almost professor-like cadence when he spoke. "We've reviewed temporary placement," Victor said, looking directly at Thomas. "Until the custody hearing is settled, and pending background clearance, you're approved to serve as legal guardian." Thomas exhaled. "Understood. You're okay with that?" Victor asked, eyeing him closely. Thomas looked at Miles. The boy had stopped drawing and now stared at him with quiet hope in his eyes. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't fear. It was something more fragile, trust offered without a word. "Yeah," Thomas said. "I'm okay with that." That evening, the house felt warmer. It was a modest home, but with Ranger padding behind Miles through every room, it began to feel lived in. Thomas set up a small sleeping cot in the second bedroom, laid out new pajamas, and let the boy pick a stuffed animal from a bin left behind by a colleague with 3 kids of her own. After dinner, grilled cheese and tomato soup, which Miles ate slowly but fully, Thomas cleaned up while the boy curled up on the couch beside Ranger. The dog's head rested on Miles's knees, tail flicking gently whenever Miles shifted. Thomas sat across the room, sipping tea, watching the two of them. "R," the boy said softly, pressing his cheek against Ranger's shoulder. Yeah, Thomas said. He's a good one. Miles didn't answer, but he smiled for the first time. Later that night, after tucking Miles into bed and setting a flashlight beside his pillow in case the dark felt too big, Thomas returned to his office. On his desk lay the sealed report Josh had delivered. He reread the memo, then opened a new file. He typed a heading, Protective Custody Misplacement Miles Harper. This wouldn't be buried. Not again. The courthouse in Deschutes County didn't look like a place where life-changing decisions were made. It was squat, built in the 1960s with dull beige brick, faded carpet, and chairs that creaked with every shift. But that morning, as a soft rain fell over Bend, Oregon, and mist crept along the edges of the pine-covered hills, the courtroom on the second floor held more weight than any courtroom Thomas Whitmore had ever stepped into. He sat in the front row, dressed in a plain gray blazer, his badge absent for the day. Beside him, Miles wore khaki pants and a button-up shirt with sleeves too long, the cuffs folded twice. His fingers nervously gripped the edge of Thomas's coat. His eyes flicked around the room, not fearful, but wary, the kind of look a child develops only after learning that not all adults tell the truth. Ellie Harper sat at the defense table in a clean blouse and jeans, her hair braided neatly and her posture straight. Her public defender, Gina Torres, a no-nonsense woman in her late 40s with a sharp chin and a voice that never wavered, stood beside her with quiet resolve. Gina had taken the case on short notice, but had committed herself completely once she saw the evidence. Judge Raymond Epps, a tall black man in his early 60s with salt and pepper hair and a stern but thoughtful expression, entered the room at precisely 9 a.m. He had a reputation for being fair, but direct, a man who didn't tolerate emotional manipulation but understood that some truths were born from pain, not performance. This hearing is to determine the criminal responsibility of Ms. Eleanor Harper in the matter of the unauthorized removal and concealment of a minor, Miles Harper, he began. Ms. Harper, you understand that the charge brought against you is felony kidnapping. Ellie rose. Yes, Your Honor. Her voice didn't shake. Gina stepped forward. Your Honor, the defense does not contest the facts of removal. We acknowledge that Miles Harper was taken from the custody of Martin Harper without legal authority. However, we present overwhelming evidence, including sealed abuse records and systemic failings within Child Protective Services, that the defendant acted not with criminal intent, but out of necessity to protect the child's life. Judge Epps tapped his pen twice. Continue. Gina outlined the full picture. The sealed records, the ignored internal memo, the previous partner of Martin Harper who had filed and withdrawn abuse claims out of fear, the whistleblower document that had been buried in bureaucracy, the photo Ellie had submitted showing Miles in her care, healthy, fed, safe, not hidden in fear, but sheltered in love. When it was Ellie's turn to speak, she did not cry. She did not beg. I know what I did was wrong, she said, voice clear. But it was also the only thing I could do. I watched the system fail my sister. Then it failed Miles. I went to every hearing. I filed every form. I called social services until they stopped answering. I didn't have money. I didn't have power. But I had eyes. And I knew what I saw. She glanced at Thomas, then at Miles. When I realized someone had found us, maybe Martin, maybe someone working for him, I panicked. I chose the bus station because it was public. I chose the suitcase because I could carry him without drawing attention. I chose Ranger because I knew a K9 wouldn't ignore a child in distress. She took a breath. I knew someone like Chief Whitmore would come. I just hoped it would be before it was too late. The room was silent for a long moment after she finished. Judge Epps looked down at his notes, then up at Ellie. You've placed this court in a difficult position, Ms. Harper. While you acted outside the law, you did so with reason and restraint. You did not flee the state. You sought medical care for the child. You maintained records. You did not hide from authorities when confronted. And you left clues deliberately, knowing that discovery was inevitable. He leaned forward. This is not a case of malice. This is a case of moral defiance against systemic failure. The gavel didn't fall, not yet. In lieu of incarceration, the court orders mandatory psychological counseling, 120 hours of community service, and probationary oversight for 1 year. All criminal charges are deferred pending compliance. A murmur rose from the back of the room, quickly hushed. Ellie closed her eyes, shoulders sagging in relief. Judge Epps continued. Regarding custody of the minor, Miles Harper, the court accepts the recommendation submitted by Child Protective Services and the caseworker assigned. Primary guardianship is awarded to Chief Thomas Whitmore on a provisional basis. A formal evaluation will follow within 30 days. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell finally. Outside, the rain had lessened to a steady drizzle. Miles and Thomas walked side by side, Ranger trailing just behind. As they reached the bottom of the courthouse steps, Ellie stepped out of the building, escorted but not cuffed. She paused under the awning, watching them. Miles looked up at Thomas, his voice a whisper. "Are you going to leave too?" Thomas stopped, crouched to his level. "I came to find you, didn't I?" Miles looked down at Ranger, then back up. "And he stays too," Thomas said with a small smile. "All the way." From the corner of his eye, he saw Ellie nod once before turning and walking the other direction, coat pulled tight, her head held high. She didn't cry. She didn't run. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to hide. Spring came slowly to Bend, Oregon, with the kind of quiet confidence that didn't need to announce itself. The pines deepened to a richer green, the creek behind the Whitmore house thawed into motion, and sunbeams filtered through windows that had seen too many cold mornings. The house, once a place of solitude and structure, now carried a different kind of energy, quieter than chaos but fuller than silence. It had been 3 months since the courtroom doors closed behind Ellie Harper and the gavel came down in her favor. 3 months since Thomas Whitmore, the town's quiet, steady police chief, had become something he'd never prepared for, a guardian. Maybe even more. Miles had settled into his new life like fog settling onto the fields, slow, quiet, but complete. He still didn't say much in front of strangers, but he spoke freely at home, mostly in whispers, sometimes in half sentences, and always with a hand on Ranger's back. The boy had gained weight. His cheeks had color. His laugh was rare but real. Ranger, now turning 9, had adapted to civilian life with ease, though he took his role beside Miles with the seriousness of a soldier on post. He shadowed the boy from room to room, lay under the dinner table, and slept at the foot of Miles's bed every night without fail. If Miles woke from a bad dream, Ranger was already there, tail wagging slow and steady like a metronome of safety. Thomas watched it all with a reverence he never expected to feel. He hadn't changed the way he spoke or the way he moved through life. Still quiet, still deliberate, but there was softness now in the way he made Miles's toast in the morning or tucked Ranger's favorite blanket beside the fireplace. On a Saturday morning in late April, the town gathered at the Bend Community Park. The occasion was informal, but the air buzzed with a kind of gratitude usually reserved for parades or holidays. The mayor, Cynthia Alden, a small woman with short silver hair and a booming laugh, had organized the event under the pretense of recognizing courage in unexpected places. Cynthia, in her early 60s and always dressed like she had a garden party to get to afterward, stood before the modest crowd with a clipboard in one hand and a microphone in the other. "Today we honor someone who followed his gut. And a dog who followed his heart," she said. "Chief Whitmore, would you come up here?" Thomas stepped up, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a leash attached to Ranger, who wore a simple red ribbon tied around his collar. Miles stood off to the side, next to a kind-faced older woman named Mrs. Patel, his new part-time tutor and occasional babysitter. She was in her 50s, wore long cardigans no matter the weather, and had a soft voice that soothed Miles like warm milk. Thomas looked out at the small crowd, officers, neighbors, a few strangers who'd followed the story through the local paper, and spoke into the mic, his voice quiet but sure. "People keep asking me why I opened the suitcase that morning," he began. "Why I didn't wait for the bomb squad. Why I broke protocol." He paused, then looked down at Ranger, whose ears perked slightly. "I trusted Ranger," he said simply. And I trusted that whoever was inside that suitcase didn't have time for us to wait. He cleared his throat. I didn't know then that I was opening the door to a whole new life. But I did it because some children don't get the chance to ask for help. Some voices are too small to be heard through rules. The crowd was silent. Some dabbed eyes. Others nodded. I just listened, Thomas finished. To a dog who still believed in people. And to a child who didn't even know he needed saving. The applause was gentle, heartfelt, and brief. After the ceremony, Thomas and Miles walked together toward the back of the park, where the pines thinned and a gravel path led to a quiet picnic area. Ellie Harper stood by a weathered wooden bench, her hands tucked into her coat pockets, her expression unreadable. She had been approved for supervised visits 2 weeks prior. This would be the first time Miles would see her since the courthouse. Thomas let the leash slip from his hand. Ranger trotted forward a few paces, looked at Ellie, then at Miles. The boy stared at her for a long moment. Then he walked forward. Ellie knelt. Miles threw his arms around her and buried his face in her shoulder. "I missed you," he whispered. She smiled through tears, holding him tight. "I missed you more, kiddo." Then he stepped back, looked up at her seriously, and said, "You kept me safe. You really did." Thomas stood nearby, arms folded, gaze soft. Ellie looked at him. "He's happy. He's home," Thomas said. They didn't need to say more. Later that evening, back at the house, Miles lay on the couch drawing. Thomas sipped tea by the window. Ranger dozed near the fireplace. The drawing was of a field and a house with a tin roof. In front of it stood 3 figures, a man, a boy, and a dog. Next to them, under the sun, stood a woman with a braid and a smile. No labels, no names, but it was clear. Miles handed it to Thomas with a small grin. "Family," he said. Thomas nodded and looked at Ranger, who thumped his tail once, then twice. "Yeah," Thomas said. "Family." In a world that often moves too fast to notice the small cries, this story reminds us that sometimes the greatest miracles come in the quietest moments. A dog sitting still beside a suitcase, a child's whisper in the dark, a second chance wrapped in silence. It wasn't grand speeches or legal systems that saved Miles. It was love in its simplest form, instinct, trust, and the courage to care when no one else did. Some would call it coincidence, but perhaps it was something more, a whisper from God, moving through the heart of a retired K9, through the hands of a man who listened, through the tears of a woman who never gave up. Because when all hope seems lost, God often sends his angels in the form of fur, footsteps, and fragile trust. In your own life, you may feel unseen or unheard. But just like Miles, just like Ellie, and just like Thomas, you are not forgotten. There's always someone listening. And sometimes that someone walks on 4 legs and reminds us that faith isn't about knowing the path. It's about trusting that the right heart will find you. If this story moved you, we ask you to share it with someone who might need a reminder that miracles still happen. Comment below, what would you have done if you found that suitcase? Or just type amen if you believe in second chances. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join our growing community of hearts that believe in compassion, courage, and God's quiet grace. Let's fill this comment section with prayers for the lost, the voiceless, and those still waiting for someone to open their suitcase. Amen if you believe.